Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those joining us from any of the European time zones. We have a good session planned for you with speakers from DOCOMOMO Singapore and SUTD, Singapore University of Technology and Design. This session will be moderated by Richard Hassell and myself. In the way of introduction, Construction Declares is an online petition uniting all strands of construction and the built environment. The movement started in May last year and in the UK, and now has over 6,000 signatories in various disciplines and across the globe. Basically, it is the declaration that climate change and threat to biodiversity are serious issues that we need to take responsibility for and to face the challenges of. In Singapore, we started the Singapore chapter of Construction Declares with SG Architects Declare and SG Structural Engineers Declare movements in February this year. In June, we set up the SG Environmental Consultants Declaration. And I'm happy to announce that just recently, a couple of weeks ago, in Singapore, the Singapore Landscape Architects joined the declarations. The 6 founding signatories of Singapore Landscape Architects are D-Land, DP Green, Grant Associates, ICN Design International, Ramwall Studio Dreisaitl, and Stephen Caffin Landscape Design. We welcome all of them to the family, and do please join us if you are landscape architects in Singapore and would like to be part of the movement. I am the founding director of Web Structures, which is one of the founding signatories of the SG Structural Engineers and SG Environmental Consultants Declaration. On the panel, Richard Hassell is a co-moderator today. Richard is the co-founding director of WOHA, an internationally recognized architectural practice based in Singapore. He has served as a board member of Design Singapore Council, the Board of Architects, as well as the Building Construction Authority of Singapore. He has lectured at many universities and served as an adjunct professor at the University of Technology, Sydney, and the University of Western Australia. Because for those of you who know Richard, and I'm sure most of you do, Richard tends to be invited to seminars and conferences as keynote speaker. Usually he has graciously agreed to co-moderate this session with me. The 2 speakers we have for you, Weng and Thomas Schroepfer, will each be presenting about 8 to 10 minutes, their presentation and their provocation, as it were, and then after that, Richard and I will take part with them in a panel discussion. Do please take part in the question and answer session, and as the presenters are presenting, do feel free to drop any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Without further ado, we go to our first speaker. I present Weng while he puts on his slides and owns the screen. Weng is founding partner of Studio Lapis, a founding board member of ICOMOS Singapore, and the founding chair of the DOCOMOMO Singapore. He is an author. He also serves on government advisory panels on heritage policy and planning. He's a dear friend who's accepted our invitation to share his thoughts on environmental capital and conservation in Singapore. Weng, over to you.
Hello. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here to have a sharing session for this webinar. And the title of my sharing is Modernist Icons as Environmental Capital, Revaluation, Rehabilitation, and Regeneration. Now, a lot of this, what I'm going to say today, goes back with the work that I do professionally as an architectural conservationist. And my area of interest is basically in the area of rehabilitation and adaptive reuse of post-war modernist architecture and adaptive reuse. I'd like to open with this statement, which is by Professor May, Director of the University College of London, Institute for Sustainable Heritage. She says historic buildings are a reservoir of embodied energy and carbon dioxide. And she goes on to say that they are a reservoir of environmental capital, right, materialized in brick, timber, and iron, right? If you add the material concrete, you will see that you can apply this statement also on post-war and concrete structures. Why is this so? I'll try to explain a little bit. This is a photo of Pearl Bank Apartments, 38-story high icon in Singapore, which is actually constructed in 1975. And it is a landmark structure that is celebrated by architectural journalists, conservationists, historians, and such. But unfortunately, it met with the fate of demolition when its owners collectively sold the property to a new developer with the intent to redevelop the site into a tower equivalent height, not much taller, similar floor area, right? But the difference is in the new building, it will comprise of many smaller apartments that can be sold at a handsome profit, right? So inch by inch, floor by floor, this building that was so celebrated in the past 20 odd years has been totally wiped out. Right. So the building, of course, is made in reinforced concrete, and we know that globally the manufacture of cement is the 4th largest contributor to worldwide carbon emissions. So together with the loss of a cultural icon, architectural icon, we actually have released tons of carbon emission back into the atmosphere. Now, how much carbon are we really talking about? And our esteemed moderator today, Dr. Rezai, in a paper, found that a typical 40-story structure built today, or built in our city today, will typically produce up to an emission of 51 million kilograms of carbon dioxide. And translating this number into trees is equivalent to carbon dioxide emission sequestered by 8.75 million trees. So that's basically saying that tearing down a large structure like this is equivalent to deforestation of 8.75 million trees. Okay, in a recent study, a recent report released by the World Green Building Council, it was stated that the total carbon emission in lifespan of a building, within that, up to 30% is embodied and unaccounted for during calculation of energy efficiency. So in all the green retrofits we see today, much of the carbon reduction is only rests on the operational aspects and not the embodied aspects. And the chair of the World Green Building Council further says, in Singapore, this percentage of embodied carbon would be even higher because typical buildings go through much shorter property development cycles as a result of being prematurely demolished. So therefore, conserving Singapore's modernist buildings such as Golden Mile Complex, which is one of the best news to arrive in Singapore, and maybe admiring fans of this building, which is another modernist icon, not only enriches cultural capital. Basically, if the Gazette goes through, it will be a landmark example of the first building of its kind to be reserved, but it would also significantly reduce carbon footprint. Now, Singapore is a very high density and compact, highly urbanized city. And there is also this is not difficult to imagine the multiply effect of this kind of effort. Right, so next I'd like to introduce or rather discuss about some example of green retrofit in Singapore, recently completed about 2 years ago. In recent years, such a green retrofit is increasingly favored, and it is actually called the Enhancement Initiative. And a number of key tenants prioritizing environmental sustainability, favor renting in properties that are well rehabilitated rather than built anew. This is the example. It's a former Development Bank of Singapore, DBS Tower. It was the tallest in Singapore when built in 1975 and was reborn as UOE Downtown. And this actually shows that there is economic and technical viability of rehabilitating aging high-rise modernist buildings. However, because current BCA, Building Construction Authority green mark systems, although they encourage retrofitting, mainly encouraging upgrading of M&E equipment, energy efficiency performance. It does not count retained and embodied carbon as energy saved. So this is something that can be relooked at to give recognition to sustainable practices of building professionals and also building owners. Now, of course, the OUE Downtown was a retrofit without consideration for conservation because nobody can recognize it as the same landmark after its retrofit. For buildings which have exceptional significance or conservation status, such as the Golden Mile Complex, definitely more creative design would be needed to reconfigure them without compromising the inherent attributes. So for example, in this case, there is a colonnaded sky deck, there is the inclined terraces, and as well as the iconic step profile of the buildings. There are some obstacles, however, towards retention and rehabilitation of modernist high-rise complex. One of which key one is code compliance, because these buildings are built in the past and they are conforming to past codes. Something that can be done and should be done quickly is to have the regulating agencies to allow for more performance-based as evaluation exemptions, right? So such like specially developed building codes for green retrofit projects in the UK and Germany. Why is this important? Because we want to preserve the heritage and original features within the design of the buildings, for example, in Golden Mile Complex. Okay, I will come to the concluding part of my sharing. In the recent past, I would say 3 to 5 years, we have seen increasing scale and extent of destruction of high-rise and large modern buildings. Not all of them are worth preserving, you would say, but certainly we have to rethink the tabula rasa, reliance on tabula rasa or blank slate approach to development especially in a high-rise, high-density, and urbanized environment in like Singapore, right? So you on the left hand, on the top left, you can see the CPF building, which was torn down just as the neighboring DBS tower was retrofitted. In the center photo, Rochor Center is arguably one of the largest public housing complex that was torn down and redeveloped, or rather torn down to make way for the North-South Corridor, underground expressway, Pearl Bank Apartments, and the UIC building. So the over time, Singapore's reliance on tearing down and building up buildings without really increasing much of the density or height has to be rethought through. And of course, there has been movements, local movement, regional and global movements, such as Singapore Architects Declare, Retrofit in the UK, and also the Climate Heritage Network that tries to tie the lofty aim of preserving cultural capital together with the gaining environmental capital for the future generation. This is my last point. I strongly feel that the creative and green retrofit of modernist buildings can help to transform the construction industry. In other countries, there has been a whole new ecosystem, construction ecosystem comprising specifiers, professionals, builders who are specialized in retrofitting and rehabilitating large buildings without tear down, right? So in that case, you can see a win-win. This movement will not only preserve social capital, but create new opportunities for expanding our economic capital for a low carbon future. Thank you.
Thank you, Weng Hin. Thank you for that beautiful presentation, and thank you for reminding us that obviously for every battle that is lost, there is some which are won, and that definitely the movement is worth supporting. And thank you for reminding us of the of URA's initiative to retain the Golden Mile complex, and that is a milestone in their development work in Singapore and retention of historic buildings. I move on to our second speaker. Dr. Thomas Schroepfer is full professor and founding associate head of the architecture and sustainable design pillar at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. He directs the university's award-winning Advanced Architecture Laboratory. He has published extensively on his work that has been exhibited at important international venues, including the Venice Architecture Biennale. Thomas is also a dear friend who has accepted to share his thoughts with us, particularly the latest book that he's published on dense and green cities. Thomas, we see the screen and we see the beautiful green mixture of green and built environment, natural environment. And this image, do please take over. Your 8 to 10 minutes start now.
Thank you, Hossein, for your introduction and for having me. I'm very happy to be able to contribute to the SG Declares webinar series. And of course, I fully support its important cause. Like many architects, I believe that our cities need to be dense if we are to address the many challenges of the current climate crisis. I also believe that high urban density is a fundamental principle for sustainable and vibrant cities. However, the current pandemic has threatened all of this, not just our ideas about dense and intense cities, but also the way we inhabit buildings and move through space. Despite the current threat caused by the pandemic, I fundamentally believe that design can be designed and that it can be designed well. It can be the ultimate test of intelligent design and, at its best, make our cities healthier, more sustainable, and more resilient. In this context, a growing number of innovative building projects allow us to rethink the very dimensionality of green. as something that is also vertical and that can, as our cities do, develop in the third dimension. Density and sustainability here are not seen as contradictory, but rather as mutually dependent and synergistic. In the following short presentation, I will introduce you to an ongoing research project at the Singapore ETH Center Future Cities Laboratory and the Singapore University of Technology and Design, titled Dense and Green Cities. The project explores the interaction between buildings and the larger city as ecological systems and the many important environmental, social, and economic benefits that resulting dense and green urban environments offer. In the previous slide and this slide, I show you the Future Cities Laboratory at the Campus for Research Excellence and Technological Enterprise in Singapore, where most of the research that I will be referring to has been conducted. FCL was established by ETH Zurich and the National Research Foundation Singapore in collaboration with key academic partners, including the Singapore University of Technology and Design in 2010, to study sustainable future cities through science, by design, and in place. FCL's agenda is the development of new integrated planning paradigms, research methodologies, and implementation processes to support higher population densities, higher standards of environmental sustainability, and not least, enhanced livability. In this context, our research explores buildings in high-density urban contexts that include public and common spaces, extensive sky terraces, sky bridges, vertical parks, roof gardens, and other green components. Combinations of all these, often applied to mixes of residential, civic, and commercial programs, conjoin at times to produce sustainable vertical cities, in which the building section becomes what the horizontal plane has entailed up to now. Over the past 5 years, we have been studying a large number of such projects with a focus on Singapore. But let me take a step back. So the idea of combining high density architecture with landscape architecture and urban greenery is of course not a new one. So what I'm sharing here with you is an engraving from the 19th century of the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which of course, you know, if history tells us correctly, this is thousands of years ago. If we fast forward this idea of the combination of greenery and architecture buildings, we can have a look at the famous Villa Savoye by Le Corbusier from 1931. Of course, this is a classic kind of modernist building. But you see here, there's an interesting way of rethinking landscape and how landscape that is occupied by the building should be replaced by an extensive roof terrace. Again, we fast forward to the year 2000. This is MD RDV's Dutch Pavilion in Hanover, Germany, in which the Dutch architects really rethought what density and build structure in the future should be. And you see here a very interesting layering of productive landscapes, as well as enclosed spaces topped with windmills and fields and so on the rooftop. This picture is not taken on the ground floor, is in fact taken somewhere in the middle of this Dutch pavilion. So it shows you, in a way, in a build statement, the idea of a complete integration of nature and architecture. Of course, in Singapore, over the last couple of years, we have seen a fair share of projects that explore this, what we refer to the dense and green paradigm. And I'm just sharing one here with you, which is Group 8 Asia's AIDA's Punggol Waterway Terraces 1 from 2015, where again, you see a very nice integration of larger urban ecosystems. In this case, a linear blue and green space, and then the replication of green spaces on multiple levels, in this case, in a public housing project. So for our research, we are actually looking at the various dimensions that such buildings can offer to provide a more sustainable urban environment. The first one being regulating ecosystem services. So this refers to the effect of dense and green buildings upon the urban microclimate, their contributions to mitigating urban heat islands and stormwater management. The project that you see here is of course Woha's Oasia Hotel Downtown that was completed in 2016 that we did an extensive case study on. The second dimension that we're very interested in with our research is supporting ecosystem services. And this refers to services that are underlying all the other services and contribute to the overall resilience of urban systems. Key supporting services of dense and green buildings include their support of higher levels of biodiversity. The project that you see on the right is again a WOHA project. It is Skywell at Dawson that was completed in 2015, again a project that we did an extensive case study on. Next are socio-cultural ecosystem services. So this refers to the contribution of dense and green buildings to human psychological well-being and culture. The project that you see here is the aforementioned Bungo Waterway Terraces 1, which again we have analyzed in depth. Last but not least, a dimension that is very interesting for us as well is the economic ecosystem services. So what does all of this cost and is there a return on investment? So this generally refers to the contribution of dense and green buildings to land value appreciation. In terms of our research findings, of course, in a short presentation like this, I can only give you a very brief overview. So first, it is important to note that dense and green buildings provide important regulating ecosystem services such as mitigating urban heat island effects. They can offset solar radiation interception. For example, greenery implemented in our research case studies led to a decrease of surface temperatures of up to 23.5 degrees Celsius. The second point is dense and green buildings provide important supporting ecosystem services such as the increase and in fact the significant increase of urban biodiversity and resilience. The third point is dense and green buildings provide important socio-cultural ecosystem services such as fostering social and cultural integration. They can in fact contribute to human psychological well-being and increase the amenity value and attractiveness of urban landscapes significantly. By providing places where people can meet, rest, and play, they foster social and cultural integration. Last but not least, dense and green buildings are affordable in terms of construction and maintenance costs. In our research, we found that construction and maintenance costs of dense and green buildings were variable, but generally quite affordable. They contributed between 1.5 and 4.5% to the overall cost. So if this research is interesting to you, I would like to use the opportunity to refer you to two publications. The one on the left is the book that Hossein referred to earlier. It was published earlier this year. It summarizes the research that we have been conducting at the Future Cities Lab and at SCTD over the last 5 years, and it's titled Dense and Green Cities. The cover that you see on the right is a forthcoming book edited by Stephen Cairns and Tunas Devisari. It's slated for publication in 2021 and summarizes not just our work, our project, but all the projects of the Future Cities Lab that were conducted over the past 5 years. So I want to close with a rendering by WOHA. I would like to state that for me, architecture is about optimism and possibility. Facing the current climate crisis and pandemic as designers, we must propose strategies for more sustainable and resilient, as well as healthier future urban environments. The dense and green city I was referring to today is one such proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for that beautiful and timely presentation. You cited a number of meaningful and environmentally responsive projects, including a couple by Richard's practice, WOHA. I just wondered, Richard, would you like to come in and contribute to the discourse for us?
Yes, thank you, Hossein. Just have to apologize in advance if I cut out. I'm having slight problems with my internet, but hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, I thought it was, both the presentations were very interesting, and in some ways, I think suggest, in a way, contradictory positions, because I think a dense and green city in many ways suggests different model of the city and buildings that are built quite differently from the past. and Weng Hing points out the immense savings in carbon from preserving what we have. And I think that that inherent contradiction is something that, as we say, Singapore particularly faces with the high churn of the buildings. Like if it did replace, I'm curious about the sort of the mathematics of it. You know, if 50% of the buildings became dense and green, would we ever save the energy through those strategies that we would lose through the demolition of the existing city fabric? I don't know if either of you have any data on that sort of comparison.
Yeah, interesting that you asked for the data. Actually, from some research we have done, what we find a very interesting case study is the United Nations headquarters in New York. I mean, in 2007, it decided to rehabilitate and not demolish its headquarters, right? Okay, of course, the reason, one main reason is because it's a modernist masterpiece by Le Corbusier. But they did the sums and found that even they erect a highly energy efficient new structure to replace this building, it will still take as long as 35 to 70 years to offset emissions incurred in the process of demolition and rebuilding. So that is quite a interesting finding, you know, it seems to suggest that building a new structure with green features will still take some time to offset the carbon emission that is due to the demolition of a large structure.
I guess, and that's envisaging a new building that is maybe more energy efficient. Yes. I think the difference with Thomas's proposal is these are in some ways regenerative projects that are having additional environmental services. Thomas, do you have any sort of data that maybe these dense and green buildings have a faster carbon payback period than a typical low energy building?
Yeah, they certainly do. But I want to say, I don't think the two strategies are contradicting each other, right? I mean, by no means am I saying, you know, that you should knock all buildings down and just build, you know, dense and green buildings instead. Neither do I think that when Hing is saying, you know, we should never build the dense and green building and preserve everything, right? So I would see these two strategies, you know, as rather kind of complementing each other. So I fully agree, where possible and meaningful, adaptation is a good strategy to employ. But of course, there are also many new buildings that go up. In fact, there are whole new cities that go up in the world, right? And I think particularly for the latter case, it's important to get things right. So just to give one example, I have a thesis student right now from Indonesia. So you probably all know that Indonesia is currently planning a new capital in Kalimantan. And what is planned there is, I would say, not even kind of up to date, right? When we look at where research on future cities stands right now. So I think when it comes to opportunities like this, where we can define what a future urban environment looks like, we have to look at the research, for example, like the one that is done at the Future Cities Laboratory. But by no means am I advocating, certainly not, you know, masterpieces of modernist architecture, to tear them down and replace them with something that looks greener, you know, than what was there before.
Good. I'm just looking through the questions from the audience. So one is, what are the economic incentives that encourage developers to ignore the carbon footprint of tearing down buildings, and what should change and why? So Weng Hing, did you have any, I think in your talk you sort of had mentioned different pressures on the sites.
Right. I don't quite fully understand the question, but I'll try my best to give an answer. Okay, I think it's not so much there are, okay, I think the problem is quite structural. If you talk about Singapore's situation, on one hand, there isn't a recognition that retention of large concrete buildings contributes towards the sustainability rating, green rating. On the other hand, there are laws that are unintentionally encouraging speculative en bloc sales, right? So these speculative and en bloc sales are is a unfortunate byproduct of wanting to carry out urban regeneration and preventing, you know, degeneration of estates into slums or badly maintained places, right? Unfortunately, because of this regulation, owners actually are pushing for buildings that are built maybe 15, 20 years ago to be collectively sold if it's managed to able to get a windfall from the trade-off, right, from the sale. So these are the two main contributing factors, I would say.
Thomas, do you have any suggestions for what should change?
What should change in terms of incentives? Is that the question?
Incentives or regulations? Yeah.
Not so much for conservation, you know. I think, you know, for the topic of dense and green buildings, there are in fact a lot of incentives already out there. Certainly in Singapore, they exist. But I just want to comment on Weng-Hin's point. I think, you know, in the Singapore context, of course, I understand that, you know, we have seen buildings that we all love very much have been torn down, right? And we already miss them. I mean, they leave a hole in the city fabric, which I mean, it reminds me every time I drive by. It's terrible, right? It's just sad, right? But you know, I think it can also go into the other extreme. I'm from Germany originally, and there the conservation regulations, laws are really strict, right? So I've seen in a way the other end of the spectrum, right, where conservation in a way prohibits the development of a city in a way that I think is a bit too much, right? So I mean, as in many things, I think is a question of the right balance. Certainly Singapore is on the other end of the spectrum, I would say right now. But as you say yourself, I mean, not every building is worth preserving, right? Not even under, you know, considerations of what is the embedded, you know, energy and what does it mean in terms of sustainability to build a new building instead. So I just wanted to quickly make that point.
Actually, I had a suggestion that URA quite liked, but they said they wanted to come from the private sector. So maybe construction declares could be one thing that pushed it. But would have some sort of reverse development charge. So it's called like a carbon charge or something. So it's maybe a sliding scale that decreases with every year over maybe we say a reasonable lifetime of a building. Maybe to stop Singapore's churn, it's 40 or 50 years or something. And so if you want to pull a building down in 20 years, you know, there's quite a significant penalty you have to pay. So I was thinking something like that might work quite nicely. Could always raise revenue for the government to pay for other environmental initiatives maybe, or to pay off carbon compensation in some other way.
I think that's actually a very, very good point. It might also have interesting side effects like better quality buildings, right, in the first place, because they have to last longer. So, but certainly there would be more upfront investment, right, which there would be a lot of resistance to. And I mean, many developers do not operate with, you know, a 20-year time span. I mean, in fact, it's often 5 years, you know, until warranties and so on are no longer applicable. And I think that is part of the dilemma. So I think your suggestion is a very good one, but also a very difficult one to implement, I guess.
Yeah, I thought it might not be that bad because it would sort of, maybe it only affects new buildings. So you're kicking the can down the road for 20 years in terms of people who will object, right, which is always a bit easier. And it could also, I think, maybe be, you know, if you decided to keep the structure, for instance, the concrete, but redo the services, maybe you know, don't have to pay the penalty. So it might encourage adaptive reuse just by targeting the heavy carbon.
I do agree. I mean, Richard, this is a very, you know, it's a worthwhile idea to maybe highlight to the authorities. In fact, we don't really have much, I mean, Singapore, the carbon tax is almost, you know, not really tied to building activity, right? And it's in other areas. I think for a start, it will buy some time, right? For it's a disincentive for the speculative on block sales, definitely, because developers would not be enticed so much by the new value, you know, of the land they buy over. I think it's really quite structural, because in Singapore the construction cost is a tiny fraction of the land cost. That is the real problem, right? And talking about incentive and regulation, maybe something has to change from the model of depending on too much on development premium or development charge as one of the key income source, revenue source for Singapore's reserves, right? If you kind of move away from such dependency, you don't really have to reassign this what you call it, plot ratio, right? Every few years when you gazette the new master plan, and part of this increase in plot ratio also is one of the factors that influence how developers think about land banks and also maximizing profit. Right?
Yes. But there is something extraordinary in Singapore where just the bump, because brand new properties always have a bump in value and older properties have a slight reduction in value. Sometimes just that differential is enough to make it profitable to pull down a building and build one back with exactly the same amount of floor area. Which is particularly peculiar aspect of Singapore, I think.
It's very peculiar. I fully agree. I haven't read my head how you know, what kind of change in the regulatory environment would discourage this from happening. Right?
Hossein, have you got some questions you'd like to ask or contribute?
Yeah, I have. I've got the question about the one that you cited and started this beautiful conversation about economic incentives, which is raised, is a good one, but it can sort of cut both ways. You know, we had Nirmal in our, I think he was one of the speakers in our first SG Declares and Shares session, and he was sort of rightly saying that if we only talk about economic incentives either way, we might end up painting ourselves into a corner where the guy says sustainability, how much? If you only talk about one set of capitals, economic capitals, for instance, then, you know, going into the battle with all the challenges that we have with that one tool only, while you can make it work at times, that may be not as sophisticated as the battle needs to be. In that we need to be looking at other capital, social capital, historic capital.
Yes. So if I can add to this, Hossein, I mean, you remember I spoke about supporting ecosystem services, right? As well as social cultural services that dense and green buildings offer. And these things are notoriously difficult to put a price tag on, right? If you have a higher level of biodiversity in a city, what does that translate to, right? So I think the equation is much bigger, right? If you look at the city as a whole, and therefore also the subtitle of my presentation today, Architecture as Urban Ecosystem. So we can no longer, I think, look at the building in isolation. We have to look at what the building does to not only its immediate urban environment, but the larger city as well. And the example that I have here in the background, the interlace, you might know that Stormwater is collected here and then channeled down to Galaya Creek, a mangrove forest. So, I mean, this is the kind of working that takes place when you design density in the right way. And again, these things are very difficult to quantify in terms of money, right? There is a project in Singapore now called Natural Capital that tries that. But I just want to highlight there are all these other effects that should be taken into account as well when we discuss cities and, you know, the right approach to move forward with urban environments as well.
Yeah, I think from a policy point of view, the ones that relate to another government expense are really great. I know there was a study in Toronto, I think, where they said just having street trees on your street put you in a health outcome category equivalent to $10,000 extra in annual salary. So I think it would be great to get some economics about impact on health, because health is a huge government expense. So I think, you know, you could justify some reduction in government revenue maybe on one side, the construction side, if it could be balanced on a health expenditure with on the other side, for instance. And I think there's a lot of interesting work that could be done in those areas, which would help this kind of costing out the diffuse effect on social capital, environmental capital, and you know, instead of always focusing on the economic capital.
That's right.
Absolutely. Maybe one other question. We've got about 14 minutes to go, so we have sort of plenty of time for some questions. But one of the things about our cities, the thing that has been said about, you know, densely populated areas in the COVID period, how they have been worst hit in terms of number of people who are affected, but then the fact that better facilities are available in the dense areas, in the vicinity of people, has sort of more than offset the deleterious effect of virus spread in dense area in our cities. I just wondered whether your views, general views of the cities and dense living has changed for the better or otherwise with the experience of 2020. Thomas?
Sure, I can take that one. I mean, what I try to hint at with the presentation is I very much believe there's good density and bad density, right? So I think the Corona crisis has brought this even more to the foreground. So I think environments where you have, in quotation, like bad density, they have performed very poorly, but places that have high density that is, you know, following certain planning principles, a place like Singapore has actually done fairly well. I mean, with some notable exceptions. So I think that has become even clearer. So interestingly, you know, the principles that the modernists developed in the early 20th century to give, you know, provide an alternative to the 19th century city, which kind of was suffering from very similar issues, access to air, light, sun, and so on. Ventilation, which back then, of course, was under the impression of the Spanish flu. I think those principles still hold up today. And I think that is something we have seen. So again, it's not a question of density, but can you actually design density well for me?
Richard? Do you have a question or an answer to this question?
No, I definitely think sort of resilient, simple buildings in some ways are very psychologically reassuring too in a pandemic. The ability to open a window to get fresh, clean air is psychologically very calming when you're worried about what's floating around in the air, then your air mysteriously issuing through a vent where you don't know if it's got other people's air mixed into it, or you know, whether there's someone coughing away in the in the services room doing repairs. So I think yeah, I think there's a whole host of reasons why buildings which perform well and are simple and resilient environmentally would also be very suitable for a pandemic, or, you know, even I think in future, if we're looking at resource scarce futures, things like power blackouts too, you know, like can be really disturbing, I guess, in a big complex modern building, whether you could actually get out or you're trapped inside, that sort of thing. So I'm all for simplicity and resilience, and I think if we design for that, and it's good for COVID, but it's not specifically about COVID. It's just generally a sensible approach. I think that would be a smart way to go.
Thanks. I see a lot of beautiful questions coming through. I fear we may not have time to go through all of the questions, and there are very sort of good and pertinent ones.
I'm typing some answers to them, but then they vanish. So if we say answer live, what happens? Let me try one. You can answer this one.
Yeah, okay.
You would like to answer this question live. Oh, I thought it would pop up on the screen or something. So is there a building services or MEP declares group in Singapore yet?
I'm afraid as of now, there isn't. The nearest one is the environmental consultants declare in Singapore, but definitely that will be the next group of consultants that we are talking to. We are also looking at, we've spoken with a couple of beautiful developers who are keen to be developers declare, which is sort of would be a good one to have, and contractors declare. So those are the three targets that we are all working on. So if there is anyone in the audience, these ilks of MEP, developer or contractor, please, we would like to talk to you and see how we can add those to the declaration.
Yes, we've got 88 people in the audience at the moment, so I'm sure there's, we only need 5 each from each industry to be able to do the declares. So please check with your colleagues and rivals even to see if you can put together 5. And I have to say, as one of the original signatories, lots of people came out afterwards and said, why weren't we asked to be an original signatory? So there is a bit of a cachet, I think, in being one of the first 5. So it would be great to see more groups of 5 coming in and registering their industry. Oh, we've got more ones coming in. What do you think will encourage developers, building management committees and authorities to look into adaptive reuse of buildings? Because I think we've talked about it from a technical point of view, but maybe from a desirability point of view as a development. I think Weng will have an easy answer, but maybe I'll ask Thomas first.
No, I think this one should go to Weng.
Okay. So Weng.
So I think it will be both the carrot and the stick, you know, because what is really lacking right now is the maintenance regime, right? Or rather regulation that mandate proper maintenance of buildings, especially for common areas, publicly accessible area, as a matter of public safety, right? This is never really clearly mandated, and therefore a lot of MCSTs are not basically treating that as something that is a necessity, right? Many people, I mean, by and large, think that once the building is constructed, it's finished, completed, the project is completed, you just need to keep the aircons, the M&E system running, and nobody talks about a proper maintenance of the structure, of the envelope and things like that. And over time, as the building fabric ages, it becomes to a point that it becomes very costly to carry out an overhaul in the absence of a maintenance. So I think regulatory aspect has to be stepped up as part of the the stick part of this. For the carrots, I think recently with the announcement of the Golden Mile Complex proposed gazettes, you can actually see that where there is political support, political will, and also a sympathetic bureaucracy, the agencies can actually work across ministries to come up with a raft of quite unprecedented incentives, right? And never in Singapore's development history, in the case of such a large building, have we been offered up to 30% of the conserved GFA as a bonus. And part of this can be actually exempted from development charge. That's quite remarkable. We also have seen that unprecedented measure of adjusting the plot boundary, right, which is actually tied to the land value, and to accommodate or encourage developers who want to carry this baby, to incentivize them by offering a more regularly sized plot to build the new building, right? So I think definitely it really takes, we do have quite a big scope for innovative and more bold policies. Now, the area we haven't really gone into is transfer of air rights, which other countries have practiced, because somehow current thinking within the planners, this is something not very viable in the context of Singapore, right? Because of its, again, I would say reliance on land value as one of the national revenues source. So definitely there is no shortage of both incentives as well as disincentives to encourage more into adaptive reuse.
I've talked to URA about the air rights. It was actually less about that, because I think even if you transferred rights, they could still apply development charge to the rights on the on the buyer. But actually it was just more about their careful planning for the city in terms of heights and densities, that they felt the air rights would disrupt their sort of outcome that they were doing by maybe putting something very tall or overly dense on another site, which they don't think it would support. But there's actually another aspect, I think, in Singapore, which is little appreciated, but it's the buildings of the 70s and early 80s were terribly built. The concrete was very poor quality, and a lot of it is actually, you know, like dangerously bad quality. So we see things like when the Hotel New World collapsed. I mean, it was overloaded, but the concrete was also very bad. We've actually worked on a couple of old buildings from that time. And I heard with Pearl Bank, that was actually one of the key factors, was the unknown cost of the bad concrete, how much it would cost to repair it. So it was seen as a big risk.
Yes.
So I think, yeah, we may be getting past that period, perhaps. You know, if we're looking at preserving buildings from the late 80s and 90s, I think the concrete quality was very good. So it may also give developers more confidence to retain structures, at least when they redevelop, rather than you know, having this worrying that you've got this big crumbling. I mean, we worked on one, which I won't say which one it was, but it was even discovered that the pile caps weren't connected to the piles, so
I'm not surprised at all. Yeah,
had to go back and connect the whole building up. So there's some really
it's very scary. That's scary.
Yes, yes. Yeah, there is no. I think there's no romanticism about structure built in the. I mean, especially concrete structure, you know, built in the post-war period onwards until the 90s. In fact, that is one of the key challenges faced. Even the United Nations headquarters also had to deal with 1950s concrete, you know.
Yes.
But I think one of these definitely a very important consideration, I think, in the minds of the developers. Yeah. But I think maybe what can be done is more studies, more case studies, to really capture all the so-called cost and risk. I think now we are starting to move towards that direction, which is a positive one, so that we are not, developers also have a bit less uncertainty about what they're looking at when they want to seriously consider retaining a structure and retrofitting it rather than...
Thank you, Weng. Thank you, Richard. We've got literally 30 seconds to to thank everybody. We've got a number of questions which are still coming through. We try and answer them sort of individually, at least so that those who raise the questions get some answers to it. It gives me just enough time to thank our speakers, Thomas, Weng, and my fellow moderator, Richard Hassell. And thank you everyone for joining the session. The session is recorded and it'll be on the SG Construction Declares YouTube channel. So do please have a look at it and also recommend it to your friends. Our next bi-monthly session will be in January, around the 3rd week of January. And we've got 2 fantastic speakers lined up for that with this time, not Richard, but I'll speak for myself, a proper moderator. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks, Hossein.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.